Hey friends, it's Melvin. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Here's just a few quick things I wanted to notify you guys about before we get started. First up, very soon, new episodes will be releasing Wednesday mornings rather than Tuesday. So don't panic if you don't see a new episode on Tuesday. Just wait a little longer and you'll see it in your feed. Second, we've introduced a mailbag. Check those show notes and toward the bottom you'll see a mailbag link. You'll then be able to text us any questions you might have about movies, the movie industry, or any movie/Christian related questions you might have. Then we'll respond in a future episode, so send us your questions now. Up next, Patreon polls, which are available to Patreon supporters at the $3 tier or higher, have been updated. Supporters can now suggest films or shows to be reviewed at the end of each month. The two most liked submissions will become the options for the Patreon poll, so if you want to hear us talk about your favorite movie or show, join our Patreon and start campaigning. And lastly, whether you're a new or longtime listener, please consider writing a review or rating the Cinematic Doctrine podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Apart from financially supporting on Patreon, these are the two most helpful ways to support the show. And that's it. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, my name's Melvin, and you know what I mean, Vern. Welcome to Cinematic Doctrine, a Christian podcast service that seeks to encourage and equip Christians to engage and reform the culture of cinema. In this episode, I'm joined by Chris Staron of Truce Podcast as we talk about John R. Cherry III's Ernest Saves Christmas. I love Chris Staron and I love Truce Podcast, so of course I had him back on the show this Christmas season to talk about one of his favorite Christmas flicks. When he suggested we chat Ernest Saves Christmas, I jumped at the opportunity to revisit Jim Varney's classic character. I don't typically throw this term around much, but rewatching Ernest Saves Christmas was very wholesome, and reminded me of the comfort one can have watching holiday films. As we get started, Chris and I dive deep into our general thoughts on Ernest as a character, Slapstick as a bygone comedy format, and how nostalgia classes are virtually required when re-watching films we used to like as a child. Then our trivia section borderline advocates string theory as we ponder the consistent themes, tropes, and overlapping characteristics of many Christmas films featuring Santa Claus, and how there may be a secret Santa cinematic universe. Chris also shares some amazing history on how Jim Varney and John R. Cherry III built Ernest P. Worrell into a dominating advertising icon and popular Disney character. And lastly, we have a candid discussion on how comedy and slapstick can often be at the expense of others, and how sometimes Christians are uncomfortable with that. So we head to scripture for some literary parallels between the book of Esther and the book of 1 Samuel, and how one can be read with comedic intentions, and the other would be inappropriate to read for kicks. As always, give our guest, Chris Staron, some love and be sure to follow Truce Podcast after the episode. Without further ado, here's our discussion on Ernest Saves Christmas. So I guess it's been a couple months since the Hamilton episode, but if anybody listening, you will recognize Chris. Well, actually, if you listen to Truce Podcast, you'll recognize Chris Staron. Chris Staron, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for doing this ridiculous film with me. I'm so excited to talk about Ernest Saves Christmas. I'm so excited.
My gosh. I got to tell you that every time I've typed it out, in fact, you might even see this if you look at the URL for our Zencastr, which is the app we use to record, podcasters use to record. Every time I have said Ernest Saves Christmas, I've never actually said that. I've said Ernest Scared Stupid.
Yeah.
Every time.
I saw
the URL
that.
even titles. Yeah.
I saw that. I'm like, oh, does he think we're talking about Ernest Scared Stupid? Did I watch the wrong movie?
It's my favorite one.
Yeah.
But like, when I saved the document to prepare notes, like on my Microsoft Word document, I wrote Ernest Scared Stupid. When I've said it to my wife, like, hey, I'm going to rent Ernest Scared Stupid. So just every time, dude, every time. Yeah. But oh my goodness.
I got to cheat on that one because this is the only Ernest movie I own. So I had the DVD of it. I got to cheat. Yeah.
Man. Mm-hmm. So that even just means it's the one that you have most in your mind.
I do, yeah. And
so
it was a gift from an ex-roommate's girlfriend at the time, and so she gifted it to us, and it's like she knows us so well.
Yeah, it's like a very specific Christmas movie.
You wouldn't give this to everyone, but you knew that I would like it.
That's awesome. So, Chris, before we get ahead of ourselves, why don't you tell us about your podcast?
Sure, yeah. I am the host of the Truce podcast, which is a show that looks inside the Christian church at things that glom onto Christianity. And then the goal is to figure out, how did those things get there and how can we do better? And so that includes things like pyramid schemes, political campaigns, and right now I'm telling this long story of how the rise of communism in Russia impacted the American Christian church and created an era of public religion in the United States. So it's a huge story, and even if you're not a history nerd like I am, I think you can still like it. It's a very creative show, and I try to make it so everybody can access it.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Every time I listen to it, I love the creativity you put into the show. I know there was one where you talked about like the U.S. map, and how like the map we have in our mind is actually like decades old and is not
totally
up to date.
Incorrect.
Yeah,
totally incorrect.
And what you did is when you went to like a convention and interviewed random people and just said like, hey, draw the US map. And obviously like it sounds like something you would need video for, but you were such a good podcaster that you captured all of their like intonations and everything about them, where they're like, I think this is where this state is. And then meanwhile you're like, by the way, I also asked you to draw out the territories. And you're like, oh, they're not going to get that. And it was just a great hook to then go into like how this is. Yeah, it was just great. Everyone should absolutely plug into it. And also, you can check out on the Cinematic Doctrine website for an amazing interview with Chris. That is just spoke to me and my wife with one of the ways that he answered the question. And so just great.
Praise God.
You absolutely need to plug into Truce.
Thanks. Yeah. And I used to make Christian films too, so I have some background. I also worked on the Bernie Mac show as an intern. I worked on Hell's Kitchen the first season, the reality TV show. So I've got some background in film, so I might throw some of that into this film. We'll say in our discussion.
And now you're going to move over to the UK and work on the Great British Baking Show.
You know what? I would gain so much weight. It would. It would be the death of me. It would be the death of me.
Well, we don't want that. We want you to talk about Ernest Saves Christmas. So we should get started.
Please.
So here we are. We're going to talk about Ernest Saves Christmas. This is a movie that Chris emailed me about. He was timid. He was not thinking that. He was like, here, let me sell this to you.
But you review all these really important, deep films.
One episode after we reviewed Jiu-Jitsu. It's like perfect.
Yeah,
I love this.
You know, First Reformed and all, you know.
Ghost Story, some good stuff.
Yeah.
She Dies Tomorrow, but 2020 has been a tough year, so we need to lighten things up.
We do.
And so I love that you recommended we do Ernest Saves Christmas. So this is going to totally be perfect.
Yeah.
Ernest Saves Christmas is directed by John R. Cherry III, who's basically directed all of the Ernest movies. I don't know if I'm curious. I didn't find this out if he did the commercials too.
He did. Yeah.
Oh, did he?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of the commercials were filmed in his house.
Wow. That's so this guy, did he participate in the creation of the Ernest character then?
He did. Yeah. I could save that for the trivia section, or we can talk about that now, whatever you like.
All right. You got to keep listening then.
Yeah, we should tease it. Yeah.
All right. Written by Ed Turner. I could not also, I went on IMDb. I looked on the movie database and I could not see what else that Ed Turner had really like worked on in terms of comedy or anything.
Well, a lot of these guys didn't do much anything else.
Wow.
This defined a lot of the people, the Ernest series.
That's kind of sweet. Just friends making movies.
Yeah.
And promoting Coke products. That's awesome. This film is starring Jim Varney from the Ernest franchise, clearly, and also from Toy Story and a lot of other Pixar stuff. So that's pretty neat. We got Douglas Seale is also in this movie. He's from Aladdin, The Rescuers Down Under, so some other Disney productions. Noelle Parker, Gailard Sartain. I don't know if I'm getting his last name right. Hopefully I did.
Who was in Fried Green Tomatoes.
Is he really?
Yeah, he was in Fried Green Tomatoes. Yep.
Was Bill Byrge with him as well? Because it looks like the two of them were inseparable.
Bill Byrge was only in Ernest stuff. He did like nothing else that I could find. He was only in Ernest stuff. And he's actually pretty great in the Ernest series.
His expressions, he does a very physical performance. It's so entertaining. He's such a fun time. And then also we have Oliver Clark. And so the synopsis we have for Ernest Saves Christmas is Santa Claus is searching for a replacement. His magic is running out, and with 2 days left until Christmas, which, man, you could not pick a worse time to look for a replacement. Maybe look like in January instead of 2 days before Christmas.
Yeah.
Anyways, he's 2 days until Christmas, and he's searching for a righteous and kind-hearted man to take his place. In doing so, the magic will return as he passes on the role, and Christmas will be safe. But wouldn't you believe it, the taxi he hails is driven by none other than the infamously ludicrous Ernest P. Worrell, Jim Varney's classic character. And Santa Claus may find there's a few more problems he'll accumulate during his venture to find the new Santa Claus. From rekindling Christmas cheer in a young runaway, sneaking into Hollywood sets with goofy costumes, reindeer climbing on ceilings, and a chaotic sleigh ride featuring lots of screaming, Ernest Saves Christmas offers holiday cheer that's fun for the whole family.
That chaotic sleigh ride you mentioned, by the way, has one of my all-time favorite cinema lines. They stop suddenly when they're in outer space, which makes no sense. And they've been going crazy. And then Ernest says to the elves, "Nobody moves, nobody dies." And it's... Oh, it's such a great line, though. Oh, it's so silly. And then, of course, one of the elves sneezes and they go back and, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. So good. So we're going to also give you a little about the MPAA rating, and it's rated PG, and there's no certificate, so it doesn't really give you ideas of exactly why it's rated PG as opposed to G. But we came up with a few different things. First of all, there's a lot of blatant product placement, like Coca-Cola, Bud Light, the Christmas stuff, Ernest stuff. And there's also brief imagery that contains women and men in bathing suits, but it's not very much. So it doesn't, it's not super sexy or anything.
Yeah.
There's a second commandment violation. If you don't like visions of Jesus like being manifested, there is a Jesus in a manger. And so if your convictions lean that you don't want to see any of those things, this will probably upset you. By the way, I have an upcoming episode about nativity scenes.
Ah, that's like perfect.
The legality of nativity scenes on public property.
I'm really excited to listen to that one.
Yeah. They're getting into the Supreme Court decisions. Anyway, little more plug for Truce.
Supreme Court decisions on baby Jesus. This is awesome. My goodness. I can't wait.
Yeah, that'll be a great way to build the audience. For me. That's awesome. There's an implied swear word. The movie is clean, and the word is not said, but it's implied. Like you can kind of fill in the blank. It's okay, but it is implied, so that might upset some viewers. And there's a scene where snakes are dumped into a truck. So first, there's this command in Genesis 1:28 that humans are to have dominion and take care of the earth, and so there's this line that can be crossed about being irresponsible with animals, accidentally hurting them by just, sloppily dumping them into a truck, that kind of thing. You could see that as being wrong. And then the second point is when Ernest removes the snake, so there's this gag where he's got a whole bunch of what are obviously fake snakes hanging from his face. And so there's a little bit, scarring, a little bit of red makeup. Not any like blood or anything. It's not graphic, and it's played for laughs. But that might bother some younger viewers to see all these snakes on a face. They could never be that many snakes on one person's face. And then there's a gag where Ernest disguises himself as like this really old comic lady with a large chest, and the character's name is Auntie Nelda. I looked that up, and he plays it in different movies. And this was honestly, it was my favorite character he plays in any of his films, because Ernest ends up kind of doing a lot of voices and impressions and other characters in his movies, and this is one of the recurring ones. Well, this could be seen as provocative,
especially with that framing, like the way it's introduced. She steps into frame, and you're like,
from behind.
Oh, that's the first thing you're going to show us about this character. It is. I will agree, though, it is probably my favorite of his costumes. Although it is a close second to the rich man when they go to the prison, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah,
so.
Also recurring. Yeah. And then there are elves who are portrayed in the movie, which is kind of a common trope with Christmas films, is you see elves, but they are little people who play them. And it can sometimes be insulting to see little people always playing that role as if that's the only thing that they can
Especially,
do.
yeah. Hollywood definitely does not have a good track record of being
Right.
respectful to people with that. So it's,
Yeah.
No getting around it. No getting around it.
And then, so there are not a lot of, this is sort of typical for this era, I hate to say, or in comedies in general, there are not a lot of great roles for women and non-white actors.
Yeah.
And that's, we still kind of see that today, unless the movie is, we kind of have this weird line where if a movie is made for Black audiences, it has a lot of Black characters in it. And then if it's not made specifically for them, it's mostly white.
Yeah.
And so this movie kind of falls into that, as do most comedies. Unfortunately, we have yet to progress to the point where you can have a really well-balanced comedy, but, and there's a fair bit of lying and deception in this movie. So, overall the movie is, family friendly and you can watch it, I think, but, there are these things that could need some addressing, especially with small kids.
It's funny that we not only in the synopsis, but you right there mentioning that it's a family-friendly film.
Yeah.
But this content awareness section was longer than Jiu-Jitsu's content awareness section, and that movie's rated R. It's so I always find that a little funny.
Yeah. Well, and the movie it has a lot of slapstick humor in it, so it's going to be sort of like a Roadrunner and cartoon where there's going to be a lot of cartoony violence that you're laughing at. And so that can be also offensive to people. And so you just kind of get that in a sit like a jiu-jitsu, there's generally not violence for humor's sake. It's violence for
violence. Violence's sake.
Yeah. It's a whole different thing to laugh at violence than it is to, either be scared by it or to like go, oh yeah, get that guy. Right. Yeah. So some people don't like violent humor.
So then lastly, in our introduction, we have our call to action, everybody's favorite part. It's my favorite part.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely don't fast forward during call to actions. When I listen to cat's out of the bag. But yeah, you can leave a review for Cinematic Doctrine on iTunes or Podchaser if you enjoy the show. And you can even probably go over to Truce Podcast. And if you enjoy that show, leave a review. Just going to put that, I don't know. You can also follow our social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also join our Facebook group titled Cinematic Doctrine Group if you'd like to talk to other Christians who love movies and sort of just keep up with sort of what's going on, participate in some really interesting conversations. Check out our other shows under the same feed, Trailer Talk and Monthly Movie News, where we talk about more other current movie culture content. You can check out our website, cinematicdoctrine.com, for other written content. We've teased in a few episodes an upcoming Quibi sort of discussion, sort of episode. And there's also going to be some Quibi written content where I talk about the best, kind of like order from worst to best, the shows that I watched there that are all basically lost media at this point because Quibi's dead. So it's going to be really interesting to go through that. Even though knowing like nobody can watch it, it's just really... It's a fascinating subject to me, and so it should be a fascinating read for you as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And also you can support us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month if you enjoy the show. You'll gain access to exclusive voting privileges and deciding a movie we discuss at the end of each month, such as the Santa Claus for last month, which was very good. Me and my wife had a good time with that. And then even Chris Staron's episode that he was on back in... I want to say that was July's
something like that
patron selected episode. And we talked about Hamilton, which was just a great time.
Yeah.
So just definitely go plug into that episode, but also plug in your credit card information into our Patreon and support for $3 a month. You also get access to an exclusive podcast show called The Pre-Show, where we just have a lot more freeform discussions because we know that podcasters just love unscripted conversations. And so you can always plug in for a lot more in-depth discussion on Christianity and life discussions there. But without further ado, Ernest Saves Christmas. It's not Ernest Scared of Christmas. It's not Ernest Saves Halloween. It's or Stupid. Ernest Saves Stupid. It is Ernest Saves Christmas. Chris Staron, you recommended this movie, so I think you should go ahead and get us started. Now, remember, this is a movie that everyone's just... The spoilers of this movie are a big deal, Chris.
Right.
So please do not share spoilers.
I won't.
But what did you think of this movie?
This film has such a big place in my heart, and as films that you grow up with have a very special place with you. So
Yes.
a lot of the times the films we see as kids, we can look past their imperfections and we can love them. I mean, if you watch The Neverending Story right now, I watched that as an adult and I think it is truly awful. But
That's awesome.
yeah.
But you still cried, right? During the
No.
one scene. You
No,
didn't?
I didn't at all. No.
I remember, okay, smallest tangent. I remember watching, there is a particular scene in that movie. I remember watching it before going to school that day, and I was just sad all day.
Yeah.
All day. So
Yeah.
I should rewatch that scene before I start work and see what happens.
Oh, man.
Anyways, go ahead.
But, you know, a lot of people have a love for The Neverending Story, but if they'd seen it as an adult first, it might not have that. So I'm saying with that, I may be a little biased.
The nostalgia glasses are on.
Ah, they're on, and they're so good. This movie and the series really shaped my family, and then me as a filmmaker. I love elevated humor where somebody is acting a little bit bigger than our world works. So if you see my film Bringing Out Bobby, we were going for a slightly elevated world where it wasn't realistic, but all the characters were sort of a little bigger than life.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. And I think it's something that we don't see a lot in comedy anymore.
Yeah.
Everything is so dark and there's not a lot
cynical.
of positive, cynical.
Yeah.
Whereas like this movie, there's so much hope, and Ernest just is like overflowing with hope and joy, even in the midst of some really bad scenarios. And he has this ability to be like a very lovable nincompoop.
Yeah.
That I think is such a great hard line to walk. You know, it's something that like Michael Scott in The Office walked that line where he was a lovable nincompoop.
Mm-hmm.
And Ernest does that very well. And also, this movie contains what I consider one of my all-time favorite comedic bits. And so there's this sequence where Ernest, he has this neighbor named Vern. And Vern, believe it or not, comes up in my family's vernacular. We talk about Vern like my older brother will say, "You know what I mean, Vern?" which is one of the lines you hear in this movie.
That's cute.
Yeah, and I don't think he even knows he's saying it. It's just part of his language, And so there's this sequence where Vern is a character you don't see. You don't ever see his face. You don't hear his voice. And this started back in the commercials when they were making ads for all sorts of things. There was this neighbor who you don't see, that Ernest talks right to the camera lens, and you're sort of in the place of Vern. And Ernest barges in with this Christmas tree and tries to set it up and disastrously. And at one point, this is the bit that I love, is he's trying to pull this cord out of the wall.
Yeah.
And he ends up yanking the cord rather than unplugging it like a human being. He yanks it and eventually rips the wires out of the wall and like shorts out the electricity in the house. It is so ridiculous.
And not only that though, because they cut away and then they cut back. He is still pulling the wire, and it is cut through paintings. It has cut through like furniture, like it's a blade, like a hot blade. It is so good.
And if you've ever done any kind of construction, you know that you don't like put the electrical cords like diagonally across the wall. They're usually like in right angles, but this one is at like all sorts of ridiculous angles. So it's totally over the top. And you can, if you want to, just like search on YouTube for clips from Ernest Saves Christmas, and you'll find that one. It is comedy gold.
So good.
It's rare in a comedy where you see one character who is completely carrying the movie. And Ernest carries the movie in every single one of his movies, to the point where a lot of the time the other actors are not that good in reality, but he just carries the whole thing on his shoulders. It's really remarkable. One of the things I love about the Ernest movies is they take us back to this bygone era where anything was possible in a movie. So the year this thing came out, I looked up all these films. The year that this movie came out, you had Beetlejuice, Die Hard, Willow, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which anybody who's followed me for a long time knows is my all-time favorite film.
Oh, wow.
They Live, which is a film about a pair of sunglasses that let a man see hidden aliens that were taking over the world.
John Carpenter, yeah.
Yeah, Big, which is a movie about a little boy who grows up, becomes a man overnight.
Yeah.
Child's Play, where a doll starts killing people. twins, which is like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito are somehow twins.
That's right.
So yeah, this movie happens in this period of any idea you had would fly in a movie.
Wow.
Anything. All those films I named are ridiculous. But they existed in this beautiful period where anything could happen in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I think that's something that's really missing in this world where everything is dystopian and all movies for teenagers are like super moody and like, oh, I love you, but I have cancer and I'm going to die by the end of the movie. Or these moody, like kids movies are like Marvel movies. They're, moody superhero things.
Yeah. Just like angry, like 40-year-old men with superpowers punching each other.
Yeah. You don't get this sort of joy that comes from this ridiculous era where like, this is like the era of Bill and Ted, where it's like, two rockers are going to save the world with their song. And I think that there's something sort of, it comes out across hokey now, but there's something very beautiful about that era that just really works for me, that takes me back. Again, Never Ending Story, ridiculous story. Labyrinth, ridiculous story, same era. But we kind of miss that magic and joy. So it's one of the things watching this over and over again over the years that keeps coming back to me is how sweet this movie is and how ridiculous the plot is, but also it kind of works because of the era it was in.
Sometimes I feel like thinking about the streaming age where a lot of streamers were just trying to get content.
Yeah.
Kind of had a taste of that for a bit. I'd say for like maybe 4 or 5 years, definitely stopping now as streaming is normalized, but or is definitely settled into normalization where these streamers were just trying to find content and bolster their stuff. So there's just like a lot of really interesting and creative stuff. I know there's some interesting kind of thoughts regarding like a Netflix show called the OA. Which is what it's called. And I heard that that's a just truly, truly bizarre show. There's even, you mentioned Labyrinth. I was just thinking of Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, which is just like, nobody would make a show with just full puppets that is over 7 hours long, except for just, I guess, if you have Netflix money. And it's great. I loved it. It'll never get a second season, and it is a cliffhanger show. So I'm just like, I mean, I know how it ends because it's set before the Dark Crystal, but like, it's like there's just there's like a taste of a lot of interesting stuff like that, or even maybe early Cartoon Network. But yeah, like from Hollywood especially, we have committees that have really decided what works.
Yeah.
And for some reason, well, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned like teenage and dystopian stuff, because then I was just thinking of like when Hollywood was just producing a ridiculous amount of young adult movies, but unless you were Harry Potter or Hunger Games, it didn't work. But then, Hunger Games is ridiculously brooding, and miserable
and very violent.
And ridiculous if you spend 5 minutes trying to figure out the plot and you're like, wait, what? But watching Ernest, I got similar vibes of like, a post-hangover comedy movie, like post-stoner comedy. This would never exist ever again. Yeah. And technically, I guess it was maybe not post-stoner comedy, but post-college comedy. Because I don't know, I forget what year Animal House came out, but that was...
I want to say it was before this.
Yeah, that was a big shift. National Lampoon stuff was a big shift in comedy, I felt like. It's nice, though, to watch an Ernest movie where it's like, hey, this comedy is just rubbery faces and costumes. I love this.
Yeah. And a lot of my favorite comedies came from this era. So like you get into sort of the What About Bobs or Groundhog Days in this era.
Yeah, Groundhog Days are great.
We miss that kind of stuff. And actually, it occurred to me watching this that slapstick humor sort of ebbs and flows through history. It started at the beginning of films and silent films. You had a lot of slapstick because vaudeville actors were coming over into the movies, and you had guys like Laurel and Hardy, which kind of work for the two guys in this movie who work at the airport, Chuck and Bobby, the big guy and the little guy. And they're very reminiscent of a Laurel and Hardy where like the big guy does all the talking, the little guy hardly ever talks. You saw that in Laurel and Hardy. And then And that kind of stuff ebbed and flowed. And then you got guys like Ernest who kind of revive this. I think that I don't know. I couldn't find anything on this, and I scoured the internet. But I want to believe that Jim Carrey must have benefited from Ernest in some ways.
Absolutely. I could not imagine if he. Yeah, there's no doubt about that in my mind.
And weirdly, like I had some hope for a resurgence of slapstick because Zach Galifianakis in the Baskets TV show was trying to bring this back. If you didn't see Baskets, it is a dramatic slapstick TV show. So it is a drama with slapstick.
Interesting.
It's a really weird blend, and only the first 2 or 3 seasons work. The rest of them it doesn't really work.
Mm-hmm.
There was this little resurgence of it. And I also wonder how much impact Jim Varney and the Ernest movies had on the Medea movies. So like Tyler Perry's films.
That's true, yeah.
Because I've been saying for years that I believe that Tyler Perry is just the Black Ernest in those films.
Yeah.
And I did see one article of somebody else who agreed with me on this, and I was so thrilled to find it.
Dozens of us. There are dozens of us.
Because like there's a lot of similarities. They play very strong characters who often get their way. Things go wrong, but they eventually sort of wrap up nicely. They're both cultural phenomenons. And even though they take sort of stereotypes about their people that they're talking about, like Ernest is very much sort of the Southerner.
Yes. Yeah.
And Tyler Perry's Medea is very much sort of the angry Black woman, or, Diary of a Mad Black Woman was one of the films. But they do that. They enter into those, in talking about those stereotypes without insulting the people and the people group.
And I even think like if you're continuing with like some lasting slapstick, a bit of Adam Sandler.
Oh, sure.
Post Adam Sandler renaissance is difficult because some of the films are not good at all. But like Hubie Halloween felt very slapstick and was actually very entertaining. My wife and I had a very fun time watching that. I know Carter Bennett really enjoyed it. I think he said it's in like his top 15 of the year.
What?
Carter, if you're listening, You're going to have to remind us if that's accurate, because it's very funny.
Huh.
But that he has very slapstick stuff, and Huey was absurdly slapstick. I was even thinking if Dairy Girls, this Scottish Netflix show, has a bit of slapstick, but that's just also because the performers in that are so expressive. So expressive. If my parents are listening, they love it because they love how expressive they are. And it has almost a slapstick vibe where like one scene a character is like holding a tray of alcohol, but like right beneath it is a candle, and you're like, well, I know what's about to happen. and of course it happens. And it's got that very like, it's so funny because slapstick doesn't feel like it has a typical structure of comedy of holding the punchline back,
Right.
Like part of comedy is being surprised.
Right.
But like slapstick almost feels like I know what's going to happen.
Right.
But I'm going to laugh anyway. Why am I going to laugh? I know what's happening. Then you do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, in a way, it's like horror films where the music and the lighting and stuff tell you that someone is going to come. Like there's going to be a jump scare. I know there's going to be a jump scare.
Yes.
And then it's very satisfying in a way when it happens.
Yeah. I know Jordan Peele says that part of what makes Get Out and Us so easy for him is because, or working on horror is so easy for him is because he's done years of comedy with Key and Peele, and it's all about preparing punchlines, setting things up, and then ensuring that the way they end is satisfying, and just doing that repeatedly. Because a horror movie that is not scary is boring, just like a comedy that is not funny is boring. So it's amazing the parallels there. I will say that like with this, seeing some of Ernest's characters, I was like, I want to see Jim Varney in a serious role. I was like, has he ever done? I looked at his backlog, but I didn't investigate too much. But apart from like, because Pixar movies are they're not as slapstick as they're barely slapstick compared to Ernest, but he's also voice acting, so it's very different.
Yeah,
and I was like, I wonder if he's done something like a drama, because when he did his characters, especially the rich man, I forget the name for it, I was like, this is like he is a completely different character.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think to myself, this is Ernest being somebody else, because Ernest does not have the wit or cleverness to be another character.
Yeah.
But Jim Varney does. And that's why I'm enjoying this. And I was like, I would love to see that character, though, maybe a little turned down in a real movie. And I was like, that would be such an interesting movie to watch this rich guy be basically a scumbag, because that's what he is, as he's lying to the police. So
well, he did do Beverly Hillbillies, which is a comedy, but there are dramatic moments within it where he's talking to Ellie Mae at one point outside, and it's a dramatic moment where he's sort of the supportive father. And there's a film, I can't remember what it was called, that he was in, or a TV show that he was in, and he has a scene where he's somebody who's yelling. He's having a very dramatic moment. So he did have some of that, and he was trying to get away from the Ernest films, or trying to at least stretch beyond them. But people kept pulling him back in. It's sort of the thing like Elvis, trying to get away from those beach movies that they made him make over and over again.
That's right.
He was so so pigeonholed in that, so typecast. It was hard for him to get away. But also Jim Varney died pretty young, so he didn't really have time to build up that extra repertoire.
It was like 2002 or 2003.
2000. Yeah.
2000. That's right. Yeah, man, that's tough.
Yeah.
To share my thoughts, though, I really enjoyed Ernest Saves Christmas. I will say it again, Ernest Scared Stupid. I like Ernest Scared Stupid, and we will talk about it someday.
Please,
now I have to.
Tell the Miak. The Miak joke in that is alone. Do you remember the Miak thing?
I remember the one where they're lost in the woods, and he says, "Remember, if you get lost in the woods, the bark grows on the outside of the tree." And that gets me every time. But what's the Miak one?
The Miak, there's apparently the only thing, I'm giving away a spoiler on the wrong film. We're not even talking about this movie, but
do it.
In Ernest Scared Stupid, the only thing that kills the trolls that are taking over this town is milk. But Ernest misreads it for Miak.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so he gets his jar of Grandma's good old fashioned Miak.
So good.
My brother and I still refer to milk as a Miak.
That's so good. There's a YouTube video where these guys are it's called Malk, and it's all about these roommates that misquote milk. So get the guy some milk, and he's like, "It's milk." No, it's malk. And he goes, "Jimmy, isn't it milk?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's milk." And it's just like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Oh, it's so good.
So anyway, yeah. So you enjoy the Ernest movies, yeah?
Yes, I do. I could just probably talk about all of them, but I'll try, and as long as I can say Ernest Saves Christmas, I'm looking at the title of the document, so I read it right. I really enjoyed this one. It was comfy to watch because I didn't quite find it stimulating in the sense of being an adult. I didn't have not as much look at me saying that at 25 years old, but I'm an adult. If you're not, I'm an adult. It counts. Ernest Saves Christmas I did enjoy, but definitely didn't have the strongest nostalgia glasses to really get into it. But I just liked how comfy it felt to watch. I really enjoyed watching Jim Varney perform. I enjoyed the very low budget 90s aesthetic. I mean, just the outfits made me so happy.
Right.
And just the hairpins in Noelle Parker's hairpins are just great. I love them. So it's just great. I also, Kat and I just chuckled at the very pre-Me Too aesthetic of Noelle Parker's character just ran away from home and then sleeps over at Ernest's house. And you're like, is this normal? But then I'm like, I guess that makes sense. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea is he's such an innocent character that would never cross his mind.
Right. It's so and it's great. It's pure and I love it. It adds to the adventure because it's just a movie that needs to move forward. And I like that. It's just, I love movies. So I just love when movies do things that are like that. It's a different universe. That's what I loved about this. It's the Ernest universe where everyone just like Ernest has a job and is a man who should not have a job.
Right.
He's too destructive to have a job.
I mean, in Ernest Goes to Jail, he is a janitor at a bank and has access to the vault. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Ernest, what is it? Ernest joins the army.
Yeah.
Who's going to give Ernest a weapon? It's so good.
Yeah.
I love it. But that's just what makes it great. It's just
what makes
this
it great.
other world. So yeah, I loved that. I loved all of
and
it.
you can have so much fun with that innocence. You can have so much fun with it because we don't have that much anymore of innocence in movies.
In a cynical movie, a character like that would just like die. Like that's what it would be. And the joke would be that, well, he died. Like that's the joke. And it's like, that's not funny. I mean, I guess I always say it in other episodes where like filmmakers can, if they're smart enough, it can work. So yeah, I guess it could work, but it's like, yeah, it's just at some point though, it gets a little numb and cynical and sad, but I'm glad that Ernest stays pure.
Yeah.
Even when he goes to jail. So that's great.
Have you seen any of Joe Pera's stuff? So to bring it back into the modern day,
I don't think so. No,
it's a Comedy Central Adult Swim show, but it is the sweetest, kindest Adult Swim show you could ever imagine. It's like an episode of Prairie Home Companion put to TV.
I'm starting to recognize the name as you're going through it. Keep going.
Joe Pera. You can watch some of them online. HBO, I think, has now sort of taken them on their streaming platform, so they're pulling it off of the free platforms. But he's a very sweet, very calm comedian. And it's such a striking difference to what, even if you watch the stand-up, everybody on stand-up is talking about these gross, perverted things. And Joe Pera is talking about these really simple things. Like one of the story arcs for his whole season is, will my bean arch, my like green bean arch that I planted in my backyard grow? And it is awesome. It's fascinating. But so I wonder if like this isn't coming back in a way. You still see some of this innocence coming, and it's in such a great sharp contrast to the in your face comedy that we get now, where it's about shock.
Could be. I mean, you just mentioned like comedy about shock. Slapstick probably had a bit of that experience in Tim and Eric stuff. I think Tim and Eric comedy at times can be very slapstick, but it's also very shocking sometimes too.
Yeah.
Or even Check It Out with Steve Brule is a very comfy guy, very much a character. John C. Reilly playing a character, probably his most entertaining character.
Yeah.
It's a bit slapstick, but also ridiculously absurd. So like kind of teeters on it, but watching their stuff kind of gives me a slapstick vibe. So I could see that, but it's like, it's so transformed and it's very modern. Tim and Eric is so absurd and there's not really cynicism in it. It's just bizarre. And so I guess maybe line's more shocking, but you don't get that in Ernest films, and that's okay because Ernest is pure and keep it pure. I have memories though of like going to like Blockbuster and just seeing shelf upon shelf of Ernest films. So there was a bit of that enjoyment of just remembering that experience, because they never had what you wanted, but they had Ernest films.
They
and that
did.
was very good stuff. I also found it funny. We mentioned the marketing and branding in this film and the content awareness. And while this film is not cynical by any means in its presentation, there is cynicism to the fact that like the beginning of this movie is a bunch of really beautiful hand-drawn photo or painted images of Santa Claus. And then very like 3 frames in, then you get him holding a Coca-Cola bottle. Yeah. Which I think like the modern day looking back aesthetic to me is cynical of just being like right away, I'm being hit in the head with an advertisement, but that's also the Ernest way.
Right.
So
he started out making commercials after all.
Right. And so it's like inevitable. So I found that funny to chuckle with, but also like, there we go.
It might also be worth noting that John Cherry, who was the director and I believe one of the writers, like he started off them doing commercials, but he was an ad executive. And then he became a film director for these movies. So, I mean, I just think ads are in his nature. And it would be natural for him to think, oh, well, we can help pay for this movie by putting Coca-Cola in it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
People still do that today.
Some of them are more subtle, but anytime there's a car in a movie and the opening shot to that car is the logo, yeah, it's an advertisement.
Oh, yeah.
They supported that movie. I also the other two things that this movie made me think of is how many other movies exist that are Christmas movies that feature Santa Claus and a prison.
Mm.
I'm just gonna let that kind of sit out there.
Yeah.
When we get into our trivia, we're gonna get into that a little more. But
Ooh.
I have seen a lot of movies where Santa Claus either goes to jail or a jail is in the movie or there's police going after Santa Claus. It's a very interesting trope to me.
Yeah.
I think it should have its own like Wikipedia article. I feel like at this point, maybe it's out there. I'll go take a look. And then lastly, I enjoyed how this film balanced its budget because it is a movie that uses a Hollywood set as a primary scene in the film because that's where they would be anyway.
Mhm.
It is very much shot in Florida. I mean, it's not only
Yeah.
the setting that's Florida, but it is literally shot in Florida. So they
Yeah.
make note of it being in Florida, which is cute. All the precious fake snow. I just love it. It has that very old Hollywood vibe to it.
Yeah.
That just makes me very happy to watch. And as a fan of movies as a culture and as a community and as an art form, that just ticks all the right boxes for me. So yeah, Ernest Saves Christmas. Yes, Ernest Saves Christmas, the movie we are talking about, the movie we are reviewing right now, not Ernest Scared Stupid. I really enjoy this one, and it was a fun time, so definitely worth the rental. And people should add that to their Christmas list, along with Muppets Christmas and
Oh, so good.
I don't know, Santa Claus. That's another one.
I should add, and you mentioned it was obviously shot in Florida. One of the things, this was shot in the Disney or MGM Studios, which is now named Disney's Hollywood Studios, and it was the first movie ever filmed there. One of the other things that you may remember that was filmed there was the outside of the Golden Girls house.
Ah, okay.
Back in the day, if you would take the tram ride through Disney MGM in Florida, you would get to see the Golden Girl house and Ernest's house.
Cute.
And I remember as a kid freaking out when I saw Ernest's house.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah. It was a really great moment for me as a kid.
I wonder if it's still there because I know they've done a lot of renovations. So I'm curious if they've updated it or if they just put some like Marvel stuff. It's such a bummer that a lot of the stuff is just changing to like Marvel and Star Wars, but instead of like all the other good stuff that Disney does. But anyways, Chris, you excited to go into our trivia section?
Oh, so excited.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting stuff here.
Yeah.
It was hard because I was like looking, I was like, were there a lot of interviews for this? Because this is like a low budget. I think it was a straight to DVD movie.
This movie? No, it was theatrical release.
Was it? Because I couldn't find out. So
the first 5 were theatrical release. So Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest Saves Christmas, Ernest Goes to Jail, Ernest Scared Stupid, and Ernest Rides Again were theatrical releases. Yeah, well, I mean, and you say it's low budget, but Ernest Goes to Camp, which was the first movie in this series, the budget was $3 million. The budget for Ernest Saves Christmas was $6 million.
Really?
So yeah, so they actually did have a bigger budget.
What's the comparison? Because I know that of course, if it's the exact number, 6 million now would be low budget, but
right,
what would that be for?
It would probably be pretty reasonable for this film being shot in Florida, and would have been probably decent for a film in released in 1988.
Yeah,
and it grossed $28 million in the box office, which is
I saw that. That's good.
That's pretty great. Yeah, and of course, I mean that doesn't account for the VHS and DVD sales and rentals, which is almost certainly where they made their money.
So I guess we've already technically gotten started our trivia section.
Here we go. Yeah.
That's great. All right, let's go into these. Trivia, typically we don't give away any spoilers, but it's also just us following our format. There's not a lot to spoil in this movie, but we like to, of course, keep that open. So I want to dive into this particular trivia, which was kind of, I almost touched on a little bit. So actor Douglas Seale plays Santa Claus in this movie. He initially plays Santa Claus in this film and had previously performed as Father Christmas in an episode of Amazing Stories titled Santa 85. And in the episode, Santa had been thrown in jail, wink, wink, and a young child who believes he is the real Santa helps him escape to finish his run of delivering presents. Now, not only does that sound a little like what happens in Ernest Saves Christmas, as Santa Claus at one point is arrested for simply being senile, I guess, which I guess gets you arrested. Also, he is later broken out by Ernest and the young woman he's been traveling with. And if you want your mind blown further, not only does it seem like Ernest Saves Christmas was influenced a little bit by this episode of Amazing Stories, but if you check out the IMDb trivia section of The Santa Claus, the Tim Allen Christmas flick we previously covered on Cinematic Doctrine, someone speculated that that film also took influence from the Amazing Stories episode. But not only that, Santa gets arrested in Netflix's Christmas Chronicles, which is absolutely ridiculous. Oh yeah, and they also sing in prison in that movie too, which in Ernest Saves Christmas, they sing in prison in this movie. What's going on, Chris? I need an explanation.
I don't know.
Is this like a cinematic universe? What's happening?
I think part of what it is Santa Claus we associate with North Pole and with, wholesomeness and giving kids toys, but part of comedy is seeing something out of its element. And I think when you think the opposite of, Santa Claus giving away gifts, it's, Santa Claus in jail.
In prison.
Yeah. And I wondered if Santa, like those prison scenes didn't inspire them to make Ernest Goes to Jail.
Could be.
The very next Ernest film.
I'm just curious if we're like 5 years away from like a Christmas movie set like in the Shawshank Redemption, but Santa Claus style, because this is like,
it could be.
This is ridiculous, but that would probably go in line with you talking about like the modern day transition into the dark, gritty, cynical comedy.
Wait, there's a movie out right now, a Mel Gibson movie out called Fat Man, which is people trying to kill Santa Claus, played by Mel Gibson.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
what is happening?
It's in theaters right now. Yeah, and I was gonna say there's also some weird little connections with Douglas Seale, who played Santa Claus. He was in Ghostbusters 2, was one of his bit roles, but he was also in Golden Girls. Which is a fun little thing since I mentioned that earlier. He had a bit role in Golden Girls.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's right.
And he was also had a bit role in Cheers, and Cheers also had characters of Vera, which was George Wendt's wife in the show. You never saw her in the series, just like you never see Vern. So they had this sort of parallel thing going on, comedic wise.
String theory.
Yeah.
Oh. We are now a string theory podcast.
Super deep. And also Douglas Seale was like a legitimate actor. He was nominated for a Tony Award for Noises Off in 1984.
Oh, wow.
So he was an accomplished actor before he became Santa Claus. Well, can I give some background on Jim Varney and Ernest?
I would love that.
I took a deep dive into this. First of all, do you know what Ernest P. Worrell's middle name is? What the P stands for?
I have no idea.
Power Tools.
Power Tools.
Ernest Power Tools.
Oh my gosh. Ernest P. Worrell, Tim Allen, Tim the Toolman Taylor. There is so much more connections.
So many
with
connections.
These Santa movies. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
We are turning into a string theory podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Before your ears.
Get out the red string and the cork board. We're going to do this.
That just blew my mind already.
Yeah.
Do it again, Chris. Do it again.
So Jim Varney was a stand-up comedian and impressionist in the 70s. And he just had a really hard time making it in the world of acting. So he moves back home. But the director of the Ernest movies, John Cherry, remembered him and called him up to do a commercial. So in this commercial, it was supposed to advertise for a rundown amusement park in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And the people had bought it, but it was so run down that the John Cherry didn't want to show it on television because nobody would want to go.
Wow.
So they came up with this idea that they would film Ernest telling his neighbor, who ended up being Vern, played by the camera, like he was talking right into the camera, telling Vern about this great amusement park. And so you don't see the park, but you're advertising for it. So that ended up becoming how they made the first commercial. And it was so popular that he ended up getting picked up by a dairy manufacturer to make commercials about ice cream and things. And they filmed up to 26 commercials in a single day. Because they would go film local commercials. And they also did some really big name commercials like Sprite they advertised for.
Mm-hmm.
But they did local things like local car dealerships and local dairies. Can you guess what the estimated number is for how many commercials Ernest appeared in?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so 26.
I'm going to say aim high.
So you said 26 and that's 26 individual commercials.
They filmed 26 individual spots in one day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I I'm going to think it's over 1,000, frankly.
You would be correct. And you're also low.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So over 5,000?
It was an estimated 6,000 commercials.
Oh my gosh.
Many of them filmed in director John Cherry's house, in or around.
Wow.
And they have all sorts of, some of the things that you see in the Ernest movies, like where he's flipping flapjacks and he throws them up in the air and they don't come back down until he wants them to. That started in a commercial.
Wow.
There, you can actually see online, there's a little mini documentary about Jim Varney that you can watch. It's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you see them filming that same pancake bit where somebody's up above him catching the pancakes off camera, just like they do in Ernest Saves Christmas. What eventually launched his career, I mean, he had this huge audience already. So the contention that this guy who made this mini documentary made was that Jim Varney was the original viral star, because he was on thousands of commercials, local commercials all around the country, all at the same time. So he was already very much famous before the movies came out.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that he was making an appearance at the Indy 500, the car race.
Yeah.
And he was going to make an appearance, and so was Mickey Mouse. And he way outperformed Mickey Mouse as far as fan reactions.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And so Michael Eisner, who was the head of Disney at the time, saw this and said, we got to get this guy in the movies.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously there's this built-in audience. And one of the things even now that movies and books are looking for are existing properties, things that already have an audience, because then that that's like a built-in group of people who are going to go see the movie. And so they end up filming the first one, Ernest Goes to Camp, which had some of the same comedic bits, like with ladders. Like at the beginning of the movie, he's tying some rope up around a ladder, up around the sign. This is like camp. I can't remember what the camp's name is. And then the ladder tips back and he falls off of it. That was a bit that they'd taken from their commercials. So they were able to kind of use that treasure trove of material and tie it back into the movies, which was pretty cool. Not only were they making Ernest, like I said, Jim Varney wanted to kind of get away from Ernest. Not that he didn't like the character, but he wanted to try to broaden his resume a little bit. But he kept getting pulled back in, including while they were making the movies, they made a TV show called Hey Vern, It's Ernest, which was canceled after only like a dozen episodes, which seems like a total shame to me. And I actually kind of remember this show as a kid and had some kind of Pee-wee's Playhouse elements to it, like Ernest's house. If you look at like all the Rube Goldberg elements of it, kind of very reminiscent of Pee-wee's Playhouse, and also Doc Brown's house in Back to the Future, because Doc Brown had a lot of those sort of Rube Goldberg elements. I guess it was just in the air back then. Believe it or not, Jim Varney won an Emmy, a daytime Emmy, for playing Ernest on Hey Vern, It's Ernest, the short-lived TV show.
That's sweet.
Isn't that so sweet?
Yeah. He
was also nominated for the worst new movie star. He won a Razzie for Ernest Goes to Camp in 1987.
Yeah. Yeah, I could believe that. Own it. Own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's so amazing, like the journey this guy makes, from like giving up acting to being pulled back in for a couple commercials to becoming like the original viral star. Yeah. And then eventually starring in all of these movies. It's kind of an incredible thing.
Well, when you were describing the initial commercial, I was like, that's really, really clever, because how do you get stuff to travel? Well, by word of mouth at that point. And so why don't you just perform a commercial that's like your friend coming over to tell you how awesome something is?
Right.
That's really great. And that's so clever. So I'm assuming then that all of the commercials, even though he was doing different products, they were still like him visiting Vern and
not all of them.
Telling Vern.
Yeah.
Okay. So they were,
but Vern made appearances, and you can get DVDs of like collections of these commercials.
Yeah. And
I kind of recommend that you do. And they kind of get repetitive after a while. I mean, they made thousands of them.
Right.
So you're going to repeat material, but it's kind of an amazing feat that they did to be able to crank out 26 spots in a day. Is just kind of insane. And a lot of them are very simple, where it's like one shot. It's Ernest flipping flapjacks and it's just that one camera angle. Or when he's telling Vern about the amusement park, it's one shot, which is just kind of an incredible little thing. They just knocked it all out. in one take.
You can do several takes in
Yeah.
one, like an hour, since the commercial's like, what, 15, 30 seconds. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's impressive.
Pretty incredible.
Need marketing like that again. But I guess that's what like YouTube marketing is at this point.
Yeah, but in a way, you do kind of see we've gone back to this era of absurd or funny commercials, and
Yes.
it's funny
Yes.
that the companies that do it are these insurance companies who you would never think would have absurd things go on, but
Right.
they kind of have embraced that.
Mhm.
And I think that Ernest played maybe a little role in setting that up. You know, it's hard to pull Christian elements out of a film like this because it's clearly about Santa Claus, which is Christmas, but not really about Christ. Ernest, while he is the snake guy, he's like pretends to be the snake guy. He whistles something. Did you catch what song he whistled?
It sounded like a Christmas carol, but like the ones that Christians like. I forget.
It was Rock of Ages. So that Rock of
Oh,
Ages,
that's right.
cleft for me.
I do remember
hide
that.
myself in the which is, you know, you can find that one little bit. There's one little bit of a sort of Christian sparkle in there.
They also have his sticker in his van or in the taxi cab when he puts down the glove box.
Oh,
It says "Keep Christ in Christmas"
see,
for like a second,
look at that.
which was a little funny. So that was clever.
There are some interesting elements to discuss in this film, where it may seem sort of like a shallow movie and it's just a comedy, but it does bring up some interesting topics about can Christians, can you and I laugh at somebody else's misery?
Yes.
That was something we ran into when we made our film Bringing Out Bobby. A lot of the comments, if you read the comments in that movie on Amazon, people are really offended that it is a comedy that talks about Jesus, because it seems like it's really hard. It's hard to have those two things next to each other, you know, or working together. And same with like being a Christian, can I laugh at somebody else's misery when that in other contexts that would seem really cruel?
That's a good question. And I guess, yeah, that's a great transition then into our next section. I don't think we'll probably have any mention of spoilers in the movie, so people can still go see it comfortably as we move forward, but definitely more in depth here. You know, your question about like, can Christians laugh at certain forms of comedy where people are getting hurt? Man, I couldn't imagine reading Esther without laughing a couple times. And that's like a very, I almost would say like, because every book of the Bible, I'm sorry, the book, the Bible. I'm not about to confuse the Bible with something else like I am Ernest Saves Christmas with Scared Stupid. The Bible, the Holy Word of God, really contains every kind of genre. And I feel like Esther is very much a dark comedy.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Haman gets his own. He like sets it.
Gosh,
you know, he sets it up, and it's a sort of a bait and switch. You think he's going to kill the Jews with this, and then he ends up getting exactly what he was setting up to get. Yeah,
right. It is like such Schadenfreude. I don't know how else to describe it. Where like you're reading it, and it is such a like. It's really satisfying in such a comedic way, while also simultaneously a dramatic way.
Right.
But like it is that unification of drama and comedy. Like you have the dramatic irony of knowing that, well, first off, that God is in control of everything. So Haman will lose no matter what. But like you don't quite know how yet, but you do know that it is going to happen. And then you don't realize that, of course, Haman is literally setting it up himself. Now that is very different to Saul and the Amalekites, where reading through First Kings, when Saul is told to slay the entirety of the Amalekites, he doesn't. And then his death, of course, is by the hand of an Amalekite. Now he was supposed to. God told him he had to. Now when he dies, it's not really funny. It is 100% drama. It is very moving and emotional, and moving in the sense of like Saul is still the bad guy, like, but there's still like this dramatic emotional connection to him as this tragic character that when he dies by the failure of his own sin, it's not like Haman, where like Haman dying is like, it's just so, the way it is written is very funny. And so I always think like with that particular question, Chris, where Christians can be like, you know, can we laugh at people getting hurt? Like, obviously there's certain kinds that are not, like Saul dying by his irony is not funny. I guess I could passively say like, yeah, it's funny, but like, it's not like, I'm not going to laugh about it. But like Haman, it's like, it's a very different like the way it's paced and everything, to me, it reads like this is an Israelite author who is purposely mocking the enemies of God as God also laughs at his enemies.
Yeah.
And we should participate in it. But not that we prepared to talk about that, but what do you think about that? Like, what do you think about, like, even just like that comparison of Esther and Saw, the book of Esther, and then First Kings, like comedy?
It's like we said that there's a lot of comparisons, a lot of things that are very similar between comedy and other genres like drama.
Yeah.
It's a lot about setting people up to either get what they expect or or to surprise them. And you can see that in the Bible, that it happens, like you said, with the story of Haman. And it's something that something can be both tragic and funny at the same time. Or even, I was thinking, in the book of Judges, there's the one judge ends up stabbing the king, and the king is so fat that he can't get the sword back out. It gets swallowed up in his fat.
Right.
Which is like the original gross out comedy, you know?
And the way it's described, like, do we even want to describe what the text says? It is so disgusting.
It is.
And I'm laughing right now thinking about it. Like, how could I not laugh about it? Right?
It's such a weird, it's such a weird thing. And so, I mean, there's a lot of conversations, especially around parents and children, about what is the role of violence in video games and in television and in movies that I should be showing my kids. You know, can I show them a Roadrunner cartoon where the coyote gets beaten up like crazy?
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, and you kind of got that, you know, The Simpsons made fun of that with Itchy and Scratchy, you know, where
that's right.
They were going way up and over to kind of show what children's television had become. It was just very violent. So they're going very big to kind of make that obvious. So I don't know if I have really good answers to that. Can Christians laugh at somebody else's misery? But as a filmmaker, I can say, especially as a comedic filmmaker, because one of our movies was a comedy, it's very hard to make comedy without having it at somebody's expense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's just sort of a reality. And part of it is also, there's a style of humor where I'm laughing because I relate to my own weakness.
Yeah.
You know, and we can laugh at ourselves. For me as a comedian, I also do improv comedy. I do a lot of things.
Renaissance man.
Renaissance, or master of none, I guess would be what I would classify it as. But,
see, that's comedy at expense, but it's a little funny. I get it. Yeah.
But to me, like, comedy is such a way that I deal with stress. I think that laughing at ourselves is a big part of what makes us human, fundamentally. So not to keep bringing up my own podcast and my own stuff, but
do it. It's great. Do it.
I started talking about the season, talking about Russia and how its communism impacted the American church. But I talked about Russia. I spent a long time talking about them because I wanted the audience to understand the journey that the Russian people took to get to that place. And one of the things that one of the historians and I talked about was this dark sense of humor that the Russian people had about their own situation. I think that humor in a lot of ways is us coping with reality. You know, it's a coping mechanism we use. And so part of that is part of laughing with our friends and laughing at people in movies is relationships almost. It's us learning how to deal with humanity and struggles and trials. That may not be the most sort of puritanical way to live your life, you know, but I want to live in a world where we can laugh at our pain. And we can laugh at our own problems. Like I belong to the same improv comedy troupe for 11 years. And we've literally, as a group, have gone through births and deaths and the suicides of some loved ones. We've gone through marriages, inside the group where people have married each other, and just bad days, you know, and to be able to go there and laugh together and bring up these things that happened to us and to be able to laugh about them, it just makes life better, you know, to be able to laugh at our circumstances and what went wrong in that day. And I think that's why we watch comedy movies. It's one of the reasons why when people can't sleep, they put on The Office, because there's something calming about comedy. There's something relatable about it that we just find comforting. So I even though it's one of those theological lines where it's like, it's going to depend on you and your family and what you can and can't take and what you find acceptable, what kinds of humor you allow into your house. But I really love Slapstick because, again, like I said, it helps me to deal with life. It helps me to be able to enjoy it a little bit more by laughing. I don't know about you. I mean, do you get the same sense from comedy?
I do. I mean, I I always feel like I have to go on the defensive, especially when talking on the podcast, knowing we're a Christian movie podcast.
Right.
When I talk about the fact that I like dark comedy, I like
Right.
horror comedies. I think they can be very entertaining at times. I like short story horror because sometimes they're just purposely funny, and almost always to teach a lesson, where you kind of go, of course that would happen, and it's always really
Right.
clever and fun, and I enjoy that. So I always feel like I have to be on the defensive, but I do that because I also think there is, as much as there's laughter at pain is one aspect of redemption, because I do believe that when we are in the new kingdom, a billion years from now, because living for eternity includes a billion years from now, we will look at the temporary affliction we experience now and chuckle about it, because it's like, I can't believe I didn't trust that this would be how I'm living now. Like,
Right.
I can't believe I sinned instead of trusted in the hope that even a billion years from now, I will be living in the presence of the Lord and everything will be perfect and I will never cry again out of pain or fear or anything like that. So why didn't I just persevere instead? And I think we would chuckle and laugh about that.
Yeah.
We wouldn't, because chuckling and laughing is not always like acceptance or glorification of something. Sometimes it is almost a sort of like it's like I think it's an aspect of redemption in some ways. Now, that said, that means there's also, when is it wrong to do it? And I think that's when cynicism is applied. So you chuckle because there's no alternative. There's no hope, so I'm going to laugh about it. This is why I think I've mentioned kind of passively, and maybe someday we'll do a new episode on this, but like a movie like Joker from 2019 is very cynical.
Yeah.
The comedy in that film is to say, well, of course this is funny because this is the only alternative. You either laugh at pain or you exist in pain and then you die and that's it. There's nothing else. And that's really bad.
Sort of nihilism.
Yeah, that's really bad. As much as I found there's one joke at the end that's not a joke, but it's the Joker making the joke about how knock, knock, who's there? I'm your neighbor. Your son just died in a car accident. As much as I found that very funny in the movie, because it's just set up the way it is, it's also like the point of the film is, what else are you going to do? You're going to cry about it and feel horrible, or you're going to laugh about it. And like, that's not the Christian walk. We don't laugh because there's no alternative. We are free to cry because things hurt. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And we're allowed to hurt. Christ was allowed to hurt a lot when he walked to Calvary.
Yeah.
And the women who were weeping for him were permitted to weep, but he also encouraged to say, weep for yourself. He didn't say stop crying and start laughing. He says, weep, but weep for yourselves because of your circumstances, knowing that I am doing my Father's will. And so there's nothing wrong here, which is wild for a man who has just been lashed, beaten, and has a crown of thorns shoved onto his head, carrying his own death cross, to say, don't cry for me. It's just wild. Man, our God is so good.
Yeah.
He's so strong. He's so strong. But it's a very different thing to cynicism, which is weak. It is very weak. And I think that's the fear, is if you're laughing at pain or dark comedy and things like that, there's a line, and I think you're kind of getting into it, where like, what is it for your family? What is it for your community? What is it for your culture? What is it for your independent walk with the Lord? That line crosses from enjoyment, so like a Haman situation, like, haha, see, he's going to get what's coming, or a tragedy where like, I think it would be inappropriate to laugh when Saul is killed by an Amalekite.
Right.
I think an example of David rending his clothes and everyone else rending their clothes over the death of Saul is evidence of the fact that it is not something funny.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. And even in terms of Jewish history, when it came to the reading of Esther, when they would read it, King Xerxes, his name, I forget the name that they give him. It's King Ahasuerus, I think. I think that's his real name. I can't remember which one, but one of the names that they give him is something like, it's a mocking name. It's like cursing at him is the name that they give him. And so even traditionally, when reading the book of Esther, it's read with like, not cynicism, but like that victorious, haughty laughter that is rightfully appropriate when reading scripture in that way. So yeah, it really what it comes down to is context, I think, is if we wanted to take another hour to talk, of which I know we don't, because for the listener, you're listening at any time of day. For us, we're recording and it's like 4 minutes to 11 p.m. So
late. Yeah.
It is late. But yeah, I think it requires a contextual literary understanding to properly understand comedy. Now, coming back to Ernest, I think it's okay to laugh when he's doing stuff and somebody's house is being torn apart while he's just trying to bring some Christmas cheer. I think that's okay.
And it's relatable because that could have happened to any of us. And I was going to say about the Purim thing or this Alice Esther. I don't know if you've ever been to a Purim celebration.
I don't think so, no.
I strongly recommend it if you can, but generally you cheer whenever Esther or what is her brother's name? Is it Mordecai?
The uncle. Mordecai is the uncle, yes. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Whenever the good guys' names are said, you cheer. And whenever Haman's name is said, because they read the whole text out loud of the book of Esther, whenever Haman is read out loud, you boo so that you don't hear his name. And it becomes this very celebratory event. And like people bring noisemakers and stuff like that, like party horns.
The original Rocky Horror Picture Show.
In a way, yes,
This is
in
great.
A way, yeah. And I think that's a way, again, the way that we humans can face a very dark subject is by laughing or celebrating in it.
And that book is really dark. Like, that's why it's a dark comedy to me, because it's very funny, but like the book starts with like, there is like a month-long drunken orgy where a wife to the king does not want to come out and dance because she'd probably be like abused.
Yeah.
And then she like is like loses her queenship, which probably means she dies. And it's like, that's evil.
Yeah.
That's so evil.
Welcome to the Bible.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, there you go.
There's lots of stories of that stuff.
And then of course, but you keep reading it and yeah, it's like a very kind of funny book. And then you're describing this ceremony of reading it, but cheering. Like, yeah, that's insane. But it's like, it makes sense. To me, it makes sense. Like it clicks in my brain.
Well, I look forward to reading the listener comments. So what y'all think about this?
Yeah, I would love to hear that.
Where's the line for comedy? What can you laugh at? What can't you laugh at? Especially in context with movies like this, with slapstick. How do you respond to slapstick humor at somebody's expense?
So safe to say then, yeah, I mean, Ernest Saves Christmas, almost said it again, Scared Stupid. Pretty good movie, pretty fun movie, good slapstick film too, as far as slapstick is concerned. I'm trying to think of another good one I would recommend that's a slapstick comedy. Chris, do you have any good slapstick comedy, even a seasonal slapstick comedy that's a good one to check out?
Oh my goodness. I would recommend watching the first 2 seasons of Baskets, if you can, the TV show. Especially though the weird mix of drama and comedy is just marvelous in the first 2 seasons. There's a scene, I don't even want to give it away. There's a scene, if you see it, with a very large piece of bread. And if you see it, tell me what you think about it, because I think it's one of the most brilliant moments I've ever seen on television.
Excellent. And Chris, where can people check you out?
Yeah, you can find the Truce Podcast anywhere you get podcasts or at trucepodcast.com. And if you want to see my films, they were Bringing Up Bobby and Between the Walls. And also I've got a short, if you got the Netflix set up where you can get DVDs, I would love to know if my stuff is still on there. And you can see my student films from when I was in film school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have a DVD of films called The Elephant, and also a DVD of short animated shorts that are also on YouTube called Pint-Sized Parables. But start with the Truce Podcast.
And the book. We can't get through this without you bringing up the book.
I have a book. Yes, I have a book as well. Called Cradle Robber, which is a time travel thriller that is really aimed at speaking to our current anger as Christians that you see in public, especially around the issue of abortion. So it's very timely right now because that's one of the main drivers of the 2016 and 2020 elections.
That's right.
But it's also a thriller and a romance. So it's a really interesting book. I'd love for you all to check it out.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Chris.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode on Ernest Saves Christmas. And thanks so much, Chris Staron from Truce Podcast, for joining me on this exciting and festive episode. If you've seen Ernest Saves Christmas, what did you think of it? If you're listening on Cinematic Doctrine's website, let us know in the comments below or shoot us an email to cinematicdoctrine@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes, Podchaser, or wherever you listen. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And as mentioned before, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss on the podcast. You also gain access to The Pre-Show, a Patreon-exclusive podcast series where we casually talk movies, Christianity, and life itself. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/cinematic doctrine. A special shout out to those who support at the Art House Theater tier on Patreon. Thank you so much, Mom, Dad, Melanie, Shirleyan, and Thomas. You guys are the best, and your continued monetary support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, stay cool.
Want some Cinematic Doctrine swag? You're in luck! We've got 3-inch Cinematic Doctrine logo stickers exclusive for Patreon supporters. Perfect for your travel mug or laptop. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine, link in the show notes, and choose the independent theater tier. Doing so will net you other perks too. But let's be real, the podcast stickers are the coolest perk. So get yourself some podcast stickers by supporting on Patreon.